Ladies and gentlemen, this RedGamingTech.com video, we actually have a little bit of information on the Xbox One's cloud computing. Jeff Henshaw, who is the group program manager of Xbox incubation and prototyping, has said that there are going to be significant cloud resources allocated to each and every Xbox sold. I'm going to read you guys an exact quote. We're provisioning for developers for every physical Xbox One we build. We're provisioning the CPU and storage equivalent for 3 Xbox Ones on the cloud. We're doing that flat out so that any game developer can assume that there's roughly 3 times the resources immediately available for their games, so that they can build bigger, persistent levels that are more inclusive for players, and they can get that right out of the gate. Now, these calculations are going to be basically latency insensitive computations, and that's the important thing right now. This is out of quote, obviously. Obviously, there is the issue of bandwidth available. So in other words, by the time you've transferred information across the internet, the server has then calculated it, doesn't matter how fast that server is incidentally, and then sent it back to you. If it's something that's required immediately, in other words, something that's not required every single frame to be updated, then that's where the cloud can help. So an example of stuff that cannot really help, the cloud cannot really help with, shall I say, would be reactions to collisions, or say how your body reacts when getting shot, that type of thing, because obviously it has to happen instantly. Similarly speaking, if you were to be playing, say, a fighting game and you were to, say, be performing a punch on someone, obviously the game cannot then send that data back and then react. However, what it can do is stuff in the actual levels itself. I'll read out an exact quote. One example of that might be the lighting. Let's say you're looking at a forest scene and you need to calculate the light coming through the trees, or you're going through a battlefield and have very dense volumetric fog that's hugging the terrain. These things often involve some complicated upfront calculations when you enter the world, but they don't necessarily have to be updated every frame. These are perfect candidates for the consoles to offload to the cloud. The cloud could then do the heavy lifting because you've got the ability to throw multiple devices at the problem in the cloud. He then offered further insight into how this works. Without getting too into the weeds, think about a lighting technique like ambient occlusion. That gives you all the cracks and crevices and shadows that happens not just from direct light. There are a number of calculations that must be done up front, and as the camera moves the effect will change. But, so when you walk into a room, it might be that the first second or two of fidelity, the lighting is done by the console, but then, as the cloud catches up with that, the data comes back down to the console and you have incredibly realistic lighting. Now, out of quote, we do know that the Xbox One doesn't have to be online all the time to work, and obviously, for example, what happens if your connection goes out in the middle of, say, playing? Does that mean that the game pauses, crashes, whatever? Well, he's actually given a quote for that as well. If there's a fast connection, and if the cloud is available, and if the scene allows it, you're obviously going to capitalize on that. In the event of a dropout, and we all know that internet can occasionally drop out, and I do say occasionally, because these days it seems we depend on internet so much as we depend upon electricity, the game is going to have to intelligently handle that. It's new technology and a new frontier for game design, and we're going to have to see it evolve the way we've seen any other technology evolve. Furthermore, in the same interview, there was also a little bit of information on the memory. Now, this isn't really anything particularly new, I don't think, to many of us, but I'll quickly go over it anyway. He basically stated that the memory can be divided up dynamically between the GPU and CPU. I'll read an exact quote. Different kinds of games will want to use the CPU, the GPU, and the RAM differently. If we try to determine ahead of time how you want to divide up the RAM between the video RAM, main RAM, and audio RAM, we're making a lot of assumptions. And when you make assumptions, you start to limit the people who are going to be making the games going forward. Meanwhile, from a different website, we have the quotes from Adam Pollington, who is an Xbox Australian spokesperson. He's quoted that it's been asked about the Xbox... I'm sorry, let me restart. It's been stated that the Xbox One is 10 times more powerful than the Xbox 360, so we're effectively 40 times greater than Xbox 360 in terms of processing capabilities using the cloud. If you look at the cloud as something that is no doubt going to evolve and grow over time, it really spells out there is no limit when the processing power of the Xbox One can go. Now, end quote. Now, there are a few things I want to add to all of this. As you guys know, I don't just like to report the news because, well, that's boring. I like to get my 2 cents in there. So there's a couple of things that I think we can touch on. The first we're going to talk about is the processing power. Now, Adam Pollington states that the Xbox One is 10 times more powerful than the Xbox 360. It's worth noting that there has been numerous websites, including my own, that have done analysis over the basic GPU and CPU processing power. And, well, yeah, we don't agree. There have been figures that have been bandied about for a while now, but in terms of pure G-flops, that figure doesn't seem to be exact. Now, I'll let you guys go to redgamingtech.com and you can check out a previous article that I've got up, which is basically Xbox One versus PS4. I don't remember the exact, but it should be on the first page. If not, you can go ahead and search for it or something like that, or you can check out the video. There's one on the channel and it links to it anyway. I'll try and remember to link it to this video to the article as well, so you can check out the description and see if I've been a chimp and forgotten. But, however, the Xbox 360 is about a fifth as powerful, maybe, as the Xbox One from what we can tell. Now, we're working on this via the G-flops of the actual graphics cores. We know that, roughly speaking, the GPU of the Xbox One is about 0.24 to 0.25 G-flops. On the other hand, the GPU of the Xbox One, it puts out around 1.24, something like that. So, yeah, that's around 5 times. Now, obviously, this is a best world and real world scenarios, so it's possible that it could be 5 to 7. So personally, I say 5 to 6 because I think that gives us a good average range. But regardless, I'm not exactly sure what figures he's quoting. It could well be that he's also quoting the CPU and GPU as well as some other bits and pieces. But obviously right now a lot of the stuff is still up in the air. So I think it depends on what you're referring to as well. Like, for example, we do know that the Xbox 360 was extremely RAM hampered, so maybe he's talking about overall, not just about the G-flops or of the GPU or something completely different. So what is my take on the cloud and computing? Well, I think we should use fighting games as an example for a moment. Why fighting games? I hate you scream. Why not something like Call of Duty? Well, there's actually a very good reason for it. Fighting games are very much frame by frame. Now, if you're a fighting game fan, which I used to be a really big one, but that's a different life, then you'll know that things happen as we're talking frames of animation. For example, you know, you'd be talking about this move is 11 frames and it gives you 3 frames of block stun, or you know, I am -2 on block. So for an example, if I was to do that move, I would be 2 frames of animation in deficit. So in other words, you have 2 frames of animation advantage over me. So I'm not going to get too technical into how fighting games work, but this stuff is really important. For example, let's say that you have a move that's 11 frames and my move's 12 frames. Well, depending upon various other criteria, in other words, how it hits, the hit heights, if you have any invincibility on that frames or whatever, you may well beat mine out. And the reason I bring this up is because this is an example. My character and your character are examples of how let's say we're playing a fighter game together, it doesn't matter if we're in the same room or whether we're across the internet or whatever. That's one of the reasons that fighting games now do a really good job of basically interpreting what it believes you're going to do. And the reason for this, of course, is to try and smooth out the latency. Now, some fighting games do it better than others, but for the most part, they're all trying to do the same thing. So, what are examples? Okay, let's say we're talking about a scene of Ryu versus Ken. I'll just use the old Street Fighter classic matchup because I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, even if you're not Street Fighter fans. Now, obviously, there are a variety of different moves that are available, and I'm just going to use a really simple fishing combo from Ryu. Down medium kick into fireball. The basic premise of this is it's a footsie move. I'm not going to get too much into it, but the basic premise is you're basically trying to fish for a hit. You're just trying to bait them out, or just playing footsies with them. In other words, yeah, I'm just trying to score a hit against that person. And obviously you have things such as hit and hurt boxes in the game as well. Now, hit boxes are basically what range of my move is going to do to you, because obviously it's a fighting game, so it's not exactly always down to the length of the limb. If you don't believe me, you can Google something like SF4 Ryu hitboxes, and you can see that in some cases the move is actually, for example, your fist would actually be, I don't know, for example, a couple of pixels away from their face. Other times, you know, it would be the equivalent of your ankle kicking them rather than your foot, just for example. Now, the reason all of this I bring up is because this is examples of stuff that simply cannot be offloaded to cloud computation, because, quite simply put, well, it's doing it on the fly. However, examples of what could be used on the cloud would be background stuff. This would be really good because, let's say, for example, even a really old example like, I don't know, Mortal Kombat 2. Do you remember all of the stuff that used to happen? Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, the old Mortal Kombats I'm talking about in the 90s, even the later ones. And you know how there's all those background figures that are doing their thing, they're animated, and they're performing in the street or cheering as you Shoryuken someone, or, you know, perform a fatality or whatever the hell you're doing. Those are prime examples of things that can be offloaded to the cloud, because they don't really matter if they're you know, a little bit behind. They're just reacting something on the fight. So even if, for example, they're half a second slow in a reaction, that's actually even realistic, because let's say you're watching a match of UFC or, you know, WWE or whatever the hell you're watching. Obviously, if you're watching stuff, it takes a second for your brain to process it and then come up with an appropriate reaction. It's especially true if the scene is pretty intense and something, you know, really amazing just happened. For example, you know, someone just broke a world record 100-meter dash or whatever. So those are examples of what can be offloaded to the cloud. Lighting, of course, can be as well. So is this equivalent of saying that an Xbox One is 4 times more powerful than what the specifications allow? No. There are obvious examples of, as I've said, I've given one prime example of how it can be useful and how it cannot be useful as well. So obviously stuff like lighting, it can be, because it's persistent. Now obviously there are some examples of this. For example, let's say, I don't know, a grenade goes off and it changes the lighting in, say, a night scene. That's a bit more tricky. However, obviously, some of this stuff is going to be computed on the GPU as well as the CPU. Similarly, it cannot help memory access. Now, what it could do in theory is help stream data. So, for example, it helps to offload what is effectively either streaming only from the hard drive. Well, let's face it, it's not streaming from the Blu-ray, because, as you guys know, it has to be installed to the actual hard disk, as far as we understand it. So, do I like this? I think that's the question that you're going to ask, and you would be probably annoyed if I didn't answer. Honestly speaking, I don't necessarily know if I like or dislike it. I think cloud computing at some points could be absolutely fantastic. Cloud servers, for example, if we're talking about either VPS, which are virtual private servers, which, in case you're not really familiar what a VPS is, it's basically a server, a literal server, so that could be including the operating system, the whatever other applications you've got installed running on another server, or over a bank of different servers, which is basically all cloud computing is. So in the case of Microsoft, you guys are probably aware if you're regular viewers, but they're using what is known as Windows Azure. Now, Windows Azure is basically their answer to cloud computing. It's actually really powerful. You can learn more by going to their website, of course, but the basic premise is that they can do many things. Now, they actually have servers in a variety of different countries. I'm not sure of the exact specific number, but I know that they're dotted around Europe, America, Asia, of course, Australia, various other places. And they can be, well, hosts for many different things. But the first is, well, cloud servers. So, as I've said before, that would be virtual web servers or whatever. Second could be database servers. So, that would be MySQL or Oracle or whatever you need to run. Others would be something that's a bit different, such as a CDN. Now, a CDN is basically a content delivery network, and all that basically is that the information on either your website or whatever is mirrored to a multiple different, and I'm talking about static content here, not dynamic content. So static content will be mirrored to many different servers around the globe, and let's say that I was accessing my own website, and let's say my website was to use a CDN, just to use a really simple example. It could be that a CDN, that would be a server in London, which serve me the content, okay? Let's say I was then to go onto a plane and I was to travel to, let's say, New York. A server in, say, New York, or the closest location to New York, that could be California, for all I know of. Obviously, California, Texas, it could be anywhere within the United States, but it probably would be one in New York or somewhere close by, because obviously New York is, well, not exactly a small location, but you guys get the idea. Similarly, if I was to hop onto a plane and go to, say, Australia, there's most likely going to be an Australian server. But if not, it would choose the location closest. You guys get the idea. So in other words, it reads where your location is based upon your IP address, and it would then serve you the data accordingly from what it perceives to be the closest server. So what about for developers? Well, obviously I am not a developer, I am not Electronic Arts, I am not Capcom. But I imagine that they're only going to be happy with this, because potentially, at the very least, it allows them to offload certain tasks which otherwise would be relegated to the console, and therefore it will help to alleviate the CPU. Now, we do know that the CPUs themselves are not exactly the fastest in the next generation of consoles. That's a given. They're basically low-power devices, despite the fact that they've got 8 hardware threads, 8 cores, but they are meant for tablets and so forth. That's not to say that they're crap or bad or terrible or whatever other bad words you want to use. They're just not high-end desktop CPUs. So obviously anything to somewhat help them is only a good thing. So what about the GPU and stuff like that? Obviously in some respects it could also be used for certain levels of streaming of data, and indeed physics, AI, all of that could maybe be offloaded. AI is obviously a really big thing, because quite simply put, we've been somewhat limited for a while now, but it's going to be a lot more offloading to the GPU and so forth with AI. That's given. Several developers have even stated that, including the Metro developers. That would be Metro Last Light or Metro 2033. So yeah. So I guess there are a couple of questions. How many developers will really make use of this? What speed internet connections do you need? Will there be like stringent requirements, that type of thing. How well will the console really in reality deal with drop-offs? Obviously, for example, it could use small little cutscenes to handle, or should I say, to cover up while it's actually streaming the data, that type of thing. But how well is it going to really work in reality? It's really unknown right now. Obviously, in a game like Metal Gear Solid, it could work extremely well. And then there's other questions, like, are Sony going to be doing the same thing? Sony have been really quiet on the cloud technology, and obviously they've bought, I believe it's Gaikai, I'm probably wrong on the pronunciation, but whatever, and obviously they're good at, well, distribution of cloud-based games, so it's going to be very interesting just to see how Sony are going to deal with this as well. Now, the reason I bring this Sony into this, of course, is because, well, you've got to. Sony obviously are not just going to, well, if they've got any sense at all, they're not going to let Microsoft have this one over them. In other words, they're not just going to say, oh, you know what, that's a very nice thing you've got there. I'm just going to let you, run with that, and I'm going to let you guys use that as a huge selling point for your customers, because then obviously you've got really uncomfortable things where technically in advertising, well, it's a massive marketing tool, isn't it? You could theoretically say that with cloud technology, the Xbox, Xbox One more powerful than the PS4. So I don't think that we're going to have situations like that. Obviously, right now we do 100% know that the PS4 beats the Xbox in certain things. That's not even questionable. We know that it's got much more memory bandwidth. We know that, despite the fact it's, of course, the Xbox One has the buffer, we do know, of course, that the PS4 has a lot more GPU processing capabilities. As I said, the Xbox One around 1.24, 1.25, something like that, GFlops. The PS4, of course, has about 1.84 GFlops, so it's a sizable difference. It's not like it's double or anything, but it's sizable. So, yeah, this is going to be an extremely interesting console war, and honestly, I don't think I've been this excited for a war between consoles in a long time, and I use massive quotation marks there because, I don't know, it always seems a bit weird to say console war. Anyway, I think that's just about it for me on this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I will see you soon. Take care, and bye for now.